Hitler's bunker had collapsed into rubble, but some of his SS officers walked out alive. The question is, what happened to them next? If you value documented World War II history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Now back to the story. As the walls of the Führer bunker crumbled under the weight of approaching Soviet forces, a tense hush fell over the surviving SS officers. Panic mixed with calculation, a chaotic blend of fear and instinct guiding every movement. Some slipped silently through underground tunnels, their footsteps echoing softly against the damp concrete, while others melted into the shadows of destroyed streets, vanishing into the night with only the stars to mark their passage. The city of Berlin, once a stronghold of power, had transformed into a labyrinth of ruins, smoke, and the distant roar of artillery. Every corner concealed danger, and each moment carried the uncertainty of life or death. For the audience, the tension is immediate. Who would survive? And who would be caught in the relentless tide of advancing forces? Officers navigated streets littered with debris, avoiding patrols, snipers, and the watchful eyes of Soviet scouts. The disorientation was compounded by the collapse of communication networks and the breakdown of command structures. Orders from higher-ups were non-existent. Officers were left to make decisions independently, balancing the instinct to survive with the overwhelming fear of capture. One lieutenant recounted moving through a partially destroyed bridge, the rubble unstable beneath his feet, knowing that a single misstep could reveal him to enemy forces. Such moments underscore the fragility of survival and heighten the audience's curiosity and suspense. Even among those moving cautiously, trust became a scarce commodity. Officers had to rely on fleeting alliances and chance encounters with other soldiers navigating the chaos. Some shared rationed food and information, while others abandoned companions at the first sign of danger. The psychological strain was immense, and the audience is drawn into the officers' inner turmoil balancing self-preservation, loyalty, and the lingering remnants of military discipline amidst the collapse of their world. Each decision carried weight, shaping the trajectory of their escape and survival. As the night deepened, fear transformed into tactical ingenuity. Officers used the crumbling infrastructure to their advantage. Sewers became covert passageways, bombed-out buildings provided cover, and the darkness itself became an ally. Each choice was a gamble. One wrong move could lead to immediate capture, execution, or worse. The narrative draws viewers into a visceral experience, feeling the oppressive tension and anticipating the outcomes of these desperate maneuvers. By dawn, only a fraction of the initial escapees had successfully evaded immediate capture. Their faces were etched with exhaustion, eyes haunted by the memories of the fallen and the city in ruins. The first chapter of their post-bunker survival had been written in silence, fear, and fleeting triumphs. For the audience, this immersive journey offers suspense, historical intrigue, and moral reflection. The officer's desperate flight is not merely a tale of survival, but a lens through which to explore human instinct, decision-making under extreme pressure, and the consequences of historical collapse. Some fled through underground tunnels, others vanished into the night, leaving the audience on edge and compelled to follow their perilous journey further. Every step could be the last. Some would never make it past the first checkpoint. The surviving SS officers moved cautiously through the shattered streets of Berlin, their senses alert to every sound, shadow, and distant rumble of artillery. Smoke hung thick in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of burning rubble, and the once familiar city had transformed into a treacherous maze. Soviet patrols scoured every corner, their presence a constant, invisible threat. Each officer had to weigh the immediate risk of exposure against the pressing need to escape, knowing that a single misstep could end their lives or send them straight into captivity. The first encounters were tense and unpredictable. Some officers narrowly avoided detection by blending into ruins, crouching behind collapsed walls, or slipping into the shadows of deserted alleys. One lieutenant recalled moving silently past a Soviet checkpoint, holding his breath as soldiers shouted orders, rifles sweeping the area. The slightest tremor, a misstep, or a misplaced glance could have revealed him. Yet careful observation, patience, and an instinct honed through years of military training kept him hidden. The audience feels the suspense of every passing second, imagining the razor-thin margin between survival and capture. For others, luck was less forgiving. A group of officers miscalculated and were discovered while attempting to cross a partially destroyed bridge. The sudden appearance of enemy troops forced a frantic decision: surrender or attempt a dangerous escape across unstable debris. Shots rang out, echoing through the empty streets, and bodies dropped amidst smoke and ruin. Some officers fell, captured or killed, while the remaining few scrambled into the labyrinth of rubble and shadow. These moments of peril emphasize the stakes and immerse viewers in the officers' struggle for survival, blending fear, tension, and admiration for their resilience. Strategic decision-making became critical. Officers relied on maps scavenged from abandoned command posts, local knowledge from coerced civilians, and careful observation of enemy movement patterns. Some chose longer, indirect routes to avoid detection. Others risked crossing open streets to reach critical checkpoints before nightfall. Every decision carried immediate consequences, and the audience is drawn into the soldier's predicament, experiencing vicarious anxiety and anticipation at each calculated risk. By dawn, the survivors had traversed kilometers of broken streets, underground passages, and open squares teeming with danger. Each narrow escape left its mark on the men, physically exhausted, psychologically strained, yet still clinging to life and purpose. The narrative tension lingers as viewers remain engaged, wondering who will continue to evade capture, how they will navigate the remaining obstacles, and whether fate will finally catch up with their desperate flight. These moments underscore the human instinct for survival under extreme pressure, allowing the audience to connect deeply with the officers' experience while anticipating the unfolding story. They walked among ordinary citizens, their crimes hidden beneath false names, forged documents, and carefully constructed personas. The surviving SS officers who escaped Berlin's collapse were thrust into a world where every street, every face could betray them. Gone were the rigid ranks and clear orders of the bunker. Now survival depended on invisibility, discretion, and the constant calculation of risk. They assumed roles as shopkeepers, laborers, or farmers, blending into communities that had no idea of their past atrocities. Yet the tension never eased. Neighbors, local authorities, and even casual strangers could become inadvertent threats, and any misstep might reveal their true identity. The audience is drawn into a cat-and-mouse scenario. Feeling the tightrope of fear and adaptation these men walked, some officers fled to sympathetic territories, places where wartime allegiances provided cover, or where Allied oversight was limited. They adopted languages, customs, and routines that masked their origins, moving quietly through towns and villages while piecing together safe routes and secure lodgings. A former lieutenant described the meticulous care required for every action. How a mispronounced word in the local dialect, or a slight hesitation at a checkpoint, could unravel months of careful concealment. Each day was a gamble, with the omnipresent danger of discovery heightening the psychological strain. For viewers, suspense builds as every seemingly mundane interaction carries the potential for exposure and consequence. Integration into civilian life was not without moral conflict. Officers often interacted with citizens who were unaware of their identities but had suffered deeply under the regime they had served. Some carried shame, guilt, or an uneasy sense of their own survival, while others maintained a cold detachment, suppressing conscience to avoid detection. The audience is confronted with this ethical complexity, reflecting on the tension between self-preservation and lingering accountability. Each choice, whether to offer aid, remain silent, or avoid contact entirely, was fraught with risk, both practical and psychological, adding layers of suspense and intrigue. At night, many officers moved under the cover of darkness, relying on shadows and secrecy to navigate towns and rural routes. Abandoned barns, forested paths, and empty roads became temporary sanctuaries. Their routines were carefully choreographed, designed to minimize attention and prevent recognition by anyone who might suspect their past. The audience feels the constant tension of these movements, understanding that even a brief encounter could trigger capture, imprisonment, or worse. These moments of stealth and vigilance underscore the precarious balance between survival and exposure. By weaving together these strategies of concealment and adaptation, the narrative illuminates the extraordinary lengths to which officers went to hide in plain sight. Every gesture, every calculated pause, every small deception contributed to their continued evasion, creating a story of survival that is simultaneously thrilling and morally complex. Viewers are immersed in the tension, curiosity, and psychological depth of post-war Europe, captivated by the precarious existence of those who walked undetected among the very populations they had once terrorized. What they revealed under pressure would shock investigators, and the process of uncovering these truths was as psychologically harrowing for the SS officers as it was essential for justice. Following their frantic escape from Berlin, many surviving officers found that no amount of secrecy or false identity could shield them indefinitely. Allied and Soviet forces, systematically combing through occupied Europe, relied on intelligence networks, tip-offs from civilians, and painstaking research to track down those who had fled the collapsing Reich. Each capture carried immense suspense, as the officers confronted the reality that survival had only delayed accountability, not eliminated it. Once apprehended, interrogation began in stark, often intimidating conditions. Officers were separated from one another, questioned in harshly lit rooms or cold detention facilities, and subjected to relentless questioning designed to extract names, locations, and operational details. Some were forced to recount events from the front lines, describe the chain of command, and detail atrocities they had witnessed or directly participated in. The weight of responsibility pressed upon them as they realized that every word could implicate themselves, their comrades, or entire units. For the audience, the suspense is palpable. What will they reveal, and what will the consequences be? Methods of interrogation varied depending on the authority. Soviet agents, meticulous and procedural, cross-reference testimonies with existing intelligence, using psychological pressure and, in some instances, threats of harsh punishment to elicit truth. Allied forces focused on extracting actionable intelligence while documenting war crimes for tribunals and prosecutions. Officers were confronted with evidence, photographs, and survivor testimonies, forcing them to acknowledge atrocities they had once justified as orders. Each session became a high-stakes negotiation of memory, morality, and survival, engaging viewers emotionally and intellectually as they anticipate the revelation of crimes and the administration of justice. That the psychological toll of these interrogations was immense. Many officers experienced guilt, shame, or panic as their actions were laid bare. Some tried deception or deflection, attempting to minimize involvement or implicate others. But skilled investigators often saw through these tactics. For the audience, this tension is gripping. Each interaction is a battle of wits and morality, with the fate of the officers hanging in the balance. The narrative immerses viewers in the mental and emotional landscape of both captors and captives, highlighting the complexity of post-war justice and the moral reckoning demanded by history. Through these interrogations, essential truths emerged. Investigators pieced together the network of decisions, commands, and atrocities that defined the final months of the Third Reich. The revelations shaped war crime trials, historical records, and collective memory. For the audience, this section creates suspense, moral reflection, and deep engagement, as each testimony uncovers layers of human behavior, consequence, and accountability. The officer's post-bunker journey, fraught with danger, evasion, and finally exposure, demonstrates that ethical failure and courage alike leave enduring legacies, compelling viewers to consider both the historical and human significance of their choices. Some faced justice, others evaded it entirely, and the fate of surviving SS officers after the fall of Berlin illustrates the unevenness of post-war retribution. As Allied and Soviet authorities sought to bring perpetrators to account, Courts and tribunals across Europe opened cases against those who had once operated within Hitler's inner circle. Officers were charged with war crimes, crimes against humanity, and complicity in genocide. Yet the outcomes were unpredictable. While some received long sentences or execution, others escaped punishment entirely, taking refuge in sympathetic territories, assuming false identities, or relying on bureaucratic loopholes. The audience is drawn into a moral and historical suspense, wondering who would face consequences and who would slip through the cracks of justice. Trials were often dramatic and harrowing, exposing the officers' actions in painstaking detail. Survivors, witnesses, and captured documents were presented to demonstrate the chain of command, the scale of atrocities, and the deliberate nature of their crimes. In one trial, an officer faced testimony from multiple witnesses, detailing atrocities committed under his direct supervision. The courtroom became a stage where the past collided with the present, and every detail revealed the systematic nature of brutality. For viewers, the tension is immersive. The stakes of accountability, the weight of evidence, and the fates of the accused hang in balance. Sentences varied widely across jurisdictions. Some officers received life imprisonment or capital punishment, while others were sentenced to relatively short terms or acquitted entirely due to insufficient evidence. Political considerations, the emerging Cold War, and regional priorities all influenced outcomes. Officers who had evaded capture for years sometimes resurfaced, tried decades later, revealing the persistent reach of justice, but also the gaps where historical bureaucracy and geopolitical concerns allowed some perpetrators to escape accountability. The audience experiences both relief and frustration, as curiosity about fairness and moral responsibility is engaged. Psychologically, the trials impacted both the defendants and the societies witnessing justice unfold. Officers confronted the weight of their past deeds, sometimes expressing remorse, denial, or defiance. Communities and victims grappled with the slow, often imperfect machinery of justice, balancing the desire for retribution with the necessity of fair legal proceedings. The narrative emphasizes that trials were not only about punishment, but also about the historical record, collective memory, and the ethical lessons drawn from confronting the legacy of atrocity. Viewers feel the complexity of these proceedings, reflecting on human behavior, accountability, and the consequences of systemic evil. Ultimately, these trials and punishments provide both closure and ambiguity. They reveal that, while some perpetrators were held accountable, others escaped full retribution, leaving a moral and historical tension that endures to this day. For the audience, this section encouraged ethical reflection, historical comprehension, and continued curiosity about the long-term impact of war crimes and the pursuit of justice. The fates of the SS officers remind viewers that decisions made under extreme conditions can reverberate across decades, shaping not only individual lives, but the collective memory of entire nations. Their names lingered in whispers, a cautionary tale of power and morality, echoing across generations long after the war ended. Some surviving SS officers became infamous in historical records, their deeds chronicled in meticulous detail by scholars and journalists. Court documents, interrogation transcripts, and testimonies preserved a legal and factual record of their crimes, ensuring that history would not forget the magnitude of their actions. Yet, alongside these accounts, a more ambiguous legacy persisted. Stories filtered through rumor, speculation, and myth, where fact and fiction blurred, leaving a complex narrative that both informed and haunted collective memory. The audience is drawn into reflection, exploring the tenuous line between remembrance and erasure. In literature, the surviving officers often served as symbols of moral collapse or cautionary examples of blind obedience. Novels, memoirs, and historical analyses recounted their choices, their survival, and their punishment in ways that emphasized ethical lessons for future generations. Some authors focused on the psychological dimensions of their actions, exploring the tension between duty and conscience. Others highlighted the arbitrary nature of justice, noting how some escaped accountability while others faced severe penalties. For viewers, these accounts create suspense and moral engagement, prompting questions about fairness, historical interpretation, and the human cost of ethical failure. Communities and nations remembered in varied ways. In Germany, some officers faded into obscurity, living quiet lives under false names or assimilating into post-war society. Local populations often whispered their presence, but lacked the means or courage to confront them. Conversely, in other countries, particularly where atrocities had been directly felt, the memory of surviving officers remained vivid, often linked to trauma, collective grief, and moral lessons taught to subsequent generations. The audience is invited to empathize with both the complexity of memory and the lingering tension between justice and forgetting, deepening engagement with the moral dimensions of history. The passage of time further complicated remembrance. As decades passed, official recognition of surviving officers' deeds or lack thereof was filtered through politics, social priorities, and emerging historical scholarship. Some were resurrected in investigative documentaries or scholarly works, bringing renewed attention to their evasion or punishment. Others remained ghostly figures, their stories partially forgotten, yet their actions continuing to ripple in historical consciousness. For viewers, this interplay between documentation, myth, and selective memory sustains curiosity, inviting reflection on the ways societies choose to remember or obscure difficult truths. Ultimately, the shadows of history reveal that the legacy of surviving SS officers is neither simple nor absolute. Their choices, crimes, and survival continue to challenge historians, ethicists, and ordinary citizens alike. The audience is left reflective, morally engaged, and emotionally invested, understanding that the lessons of war extend beyond immediate events to the complex and often contested terrain of memory. By examining how these officers are remembered or forgotten, the narrative provides closure while leaving lingering questions about justice, ethics, and the enduring impact of conscience under extreme circumstances.